It is the one universal certainty every human being on earth shares. And yet, so many resist the conversation.
So what has being around the dying taught you about living?
Today on SuperSoul Sunday.
You mentioned that moment where the body becomes the shell, and there is some kind of lingering in the air.
We ask palliative care physician and former senior director of the groundbreaking Zen Hospice Project, B.J. Miller, what really matters when we die.
One great lesson is dying people are still living.
After witnessing the moment of transition hundreds of times, Dr. B.J. Miller has come to view life and death as mutually inseparable.
The way we can prepare ourselves to die well is to live well and to live without regret.
He also has the unique perspective of facing mortality as both a doctor and a patient, after a freak accident caused him to lose 3 of his limbs when he was a college student.
How did this accident help you get in touch with the true meaning of your life?
B.J. Miller is passionate in this belief. It's time for all of us to rethink, redesign, and reimagine everything we've been taught about death. And later in this week's Super Soul Short, the international bestseller, When Breath Becomes Air, captivated millions. Today, we hear this dying man's love letter to the world.
So let's start when you say your relationship with death began. That was at 19 years old, right? You did a crazy thing. Yep. When you lost your lower legs and arm. Tell me what was going on that night.
Yeah.
Had you all been out? Had you been drinking?
A little bit, but it was
bit.
actually a pretty mild night as far as we went.
Yeah, because you've done other crazy things.
We'd done way crazier things. So we had just gotten back from Thanksgiving vacation.
How many of you?
There were 3 of us hanging out together that night. It was a Sunday night, and had a few beers, but really mostly decided to go get a sandwich and walk to what's called a Wawa market in New Jersey.
I know Wawa.
Oh, you know the Wawa? So we were walking to the Wawa, and it just so happens that our path, there's a commuter train that runs across the path. And it was just sitting there, off hours. And you know, it's a ladder on the back. You just climb it like you would a tree or a jungle gym. We really did not think we were getting in anything particularly nuts. But I happened to be the first one up the ladder, and I had a metal watch on, and I got close enough to the power lines and the electricity arc to the watch. And that was that.
It's like thousands of voltage.
11,000 volts, enough to move a commuter train.
Wow. Shot through your body.
Yep.
What does that feel like?
Not good.
Not good. Can you remember the feeling?
No, I have to say, I really don't remember the night. My first memory is about 4 days into the whole ordeal. Actually, my first memory was that night being flown to a burn unit in New Jersey. It's just one burn unit in New Jersey, St. Barnabas Hospital.
What was burned?
So with electricity, you burn from the inside out. It enters your body and then tries to get out, and it tends to incinerate where it enters and where it exits. So it entered my arm and then blew down my feet. And as your leg tapers, all that current slows and the energy gathers, and at some point your flesh just can't take it. So you burn from the inside out.
Whoa.
Sad to say. But I don't remember that night, really. Except for when they were loading me into the helicopter. I remember being too tall. I was like almost 6'5". I remember they were trying to fumble with my feet of where to put me in this helicopter thing. I vaguely remember that. But then my first memory is about 4 or 5 days into it.
What do you remember?
This is I kind of like this story, Oprah, because it's just a strange feeling. So, you know that feeling when you wake up from a dream and it was not a good dream?
Yeah.
And there's a moment where you realize, you look around, you say,
that was a dream.
All right, that was just a dream.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm okay. Everything's cool. You know,
Yeah.
it takes a little minute. You can kind of feel it happening.
Yeah.
So I woke up in the burn unit and had that sensation. I said, oh, man, oh, cool. That was just a dream. It was a horrible dream. Everything's cool. Everything was so clearly not cool. I'm in a burn unit ICU. I'm intubated. I've got lines in my jugular, but somehow I still managed to look at this whole scene and think of it as a dream. So I extubated myself, took the ventilator out, pulled the necklines out, because I had the feeling I needed to go to the bathroom. So I did all this stuff, get out of the bed, at that point, I still had my feet. They hadn't been amputated surgically yet. That was the next day. So I get out of bed, stand on my crispy little feet, start heading towards the door to go to the bathroom, still completely clueless. And then the catheter line ran out of slack. And so the way a Foley catheter works is a little ball that's in your bladder, and that keeps it secure, but when you pull on it, it doesn't go anywhere. So, So that, I fell to the floor, and in a second, the same reverse happened. I realized, oh, this was all real. This was real. And in that millisecond, it became extremely clear what had happened.
Whoa.
Yeah,
Whoa.
It was intense.
Were you filled in that moment with what? Regret, horror? Why did this happen to me? Oh no.
You know, one of the great things about, I never really had the why me.
Really?
Really not. And that's not a credit to me, that's mostly credit to my family. My mom, and I grew up with a mother who's disabled. She had polio, and she has post-polio syndrome, so a real progressive illness where she's progressively disabled. And so much of my childhood was spent with her navigating the planet from a wheelchair. And I was so very, in my bones, sensitized to disability as an idea, as a construct, as a concept. And I just knew it happened to good people. So there was no part of me that was surprised that this had happened to me. And in a way, I feel so fortunate because I got to sidestep. I watched some of my peers in similar situations have to go through a couple years of hating themselves practically, hating their lives.
Yeah, I've talked to lots of people who went through that.
Yeah.
You did not go through
Not
that.
really.
Yeah. At what point were you able to look back and see actually the beauty this accident brought into your life? It takes a long time to get there.
It takes a while to get there. Like there were moments even in the hospital where you're like, you can't believe you're alive, and you can't believe all this effort going to help you survive, and all the human innovation around you helping you live, and the devotion. And I mean, there were plenty of joyful moments even in the burn unit. Actually, I cried the day I had to leave the burn unit. It had become my home. So your frame of reference gets really strange, and everything's altered. But beauty wasn't out of reach immediately, but until I could really feel it in my bones in a daily way, and that took a couple years, and it was sort of a slow awakening.
So how did this accident help you get in touch with the true meaning of your life?
So I think the first thing it did at that age, here I'm at Princeton, I was caught up in, you take these tests to get here, and you go there to get there, and it was just sort of this future
and you're always
orientation.
Comparing yourself to what everyone else is doing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You got it.
Yeah.
And it's a kind of a prison if you're not careful. Yeah. And I was in that prison like so many of us. And the first thing that this did for me was just make it impossible to compare myself to anyone else for a little while. Like I couldn't be seduced into thinking I should be doing more or otherwise. Getting through the day, going to the bathroom was hard enough, whatever. The simplest things, it sort of recalibrated me.
Yeah.
And that was the first gift, was to at least to cease the endless striving, the endless comparing and contrasting myself to others.
Yeah, and it forced you to do what Eckhart Tolle says, in all of his books basically, that living in the present moment is the only thing that really matters. It forces you to do that in a way that you can't help but do that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly, and that's sort of related. That's a second great lesson, was that being present. I mean, that's all you have. There's no promise of a future. The past is the past. I mean, it's just empirically true, but now I could feel that truth. It was not a recreational thought, it was a therapeutic thought.
So now do you look back at that accident, and can you say that in some ways it was a gift to you?
Yeah. I mean, at some point, the lessons pile up.
Yeah.
The beautiful moments, the exchanges with others, the shared vulnerabilities, they stack up pretty quickly. And before you know it, if you're honest, the good that's come from it is so potent that I can't regret it. I would be fooling myself if I regretted this situation. Of course, you can't take it back either. I mean, there are other ways to learn these lessons. You don't need to go through that kind of an ordeal.
Did it take you time to figure that out, that you are the same person without your limbs? And and no matter how many limbs you lose, you're still you.
Yeah. I have to say, this is again credit to my mom. It didn't take me too long to get there, because in some way, Oprah,
Watching her all those years.
Watching her all those years, and
With
also
polio.
being a sort of, I was kind of a hypersensitive kid. Maybe because of my experience with my mom, watching the planet respond to her. I don't know why, but I was a little on the melancholy bent. And in a way, if I were totally honest, I remember the feeling of, well, now I look like I feel. Now my body fits me in a way. Because I didn't have any ownership of my own ordeal, ownership of my suffering. Everyone thought that I had a silver spoon in my mouth. I was given this education. I had so much access. So I could own nothing. I looked okay. I was a decent athlete. So in a way, I couldn't complain about anything. And yet I had a real misery in me as a human being trying to reconcile themselves on the planet. And now finally I looked a little bit more the part. And in a way, it was a little bit welcome. I don't mean that in a melodramatic way, but I did feel my identity quickly shifted it relatively quickly to accommodate this because it felt sort of right.
Coming up,
I have never, in all of my multi-thousands of interviews, heard someone be candid about what it means to be privileged.
and later in this week's SuperSoul short film,
I think the thing that Paul really taught me and showed me is this really simple idea that life is not about avoiding suffering, it's about finding meaning.
As a San Francisco-based hospice and palliative care physician, Dr. B.J. Miller practices mindful care of his patients every day. A deep feeling of empathic connection has abided with B.J., he says, from a very young age. Raised in the suburbs of Chicago, B.J. attended an East Coast boarding school before his acceptance to Princeton. Despite being surrounded by affluence, B.J. says he could feel his life devolving before he even had the opportunity to evolve.
No, it's so interesting. I have never, in all of my multi-thousands of interviews, heard someone be candid about what it means to be privileged, really. Because you go through the world and you're so totally privileged. I often wonder and ask my friends who, are of privilege, how do you raise kids with kindness, with grace, and their own sense of ambition when you've actually had everything? And that is its own cross to bear too. But those of us who grew up poor and just trying to get a meal, don't think of it that way.
Yeah, of course not.
No.
Yeah. And I don't mean to make too much of it, but it's a kind of a quiet suffering that you really can't share with others because you just sound ungrateful.
Yeah.
But for my money, and this is what helped me understand all this, I think being a human being is just plain hard. And if I think about some of the people I know, some of the most miserable people I know are of great privilege. I think the human conundrum of having an imagination, being able to imagine a world that you don't have one way or another, to have this sense of power to know the questions but not enough power to know the answers. I mean, however you describe it, being a human being, I think, is a very difficult proposition, period.
And figuring out why you're here and what that all means. Yeah.
And it does help to have something to push against, whether it's an injury or perhaps poverty, not that I can describe that, but something to rail against, to motivate you, to mobilize your energies, to push against. And
fight for.
To fight for. In a way, I think death gives us that nice bookend, there's something to shove against, this fulcrum, this pole to bounce off of.
Oh, for sure. If we didn't have death, nobody would ever get anything done.
No, ma'am.
There wouldn't be a damn thing ever accomplished.
No, why would you get out of bed? I'll do it tomorrow.
If we didn't have death pushing against us, nobody would ever do anything.
No.
Yeah.
And now I find myself giving talks more often.
Yeah.
And one of the things I love to ask the audience, because I think we absorb this idea that death is bad, death is inherently negative, it's nothing but losing control, it's all negatively framed. But when I ask this question to most audiences, I say, if you could push a button and live forever, would you push that button? I mean, it's a silly question, depends on the conditions, but still, you get the point. And I'd say I've asked that question maybe 30 times and of thousands of people by now, and maybe 10% of people say they'd push that button. So that tells me a lot. So death isn't necessarily this ogre that we all don't want anything. And actually, at some point, we kind of welcome it. So I just use that to kind of help us reframe the whole idea that death is inherently horrible. I don't think it is, and most of us, I don't know how you'd answer that question. I know I wouldn't push that button.
No, I wouldn't push it either. I'd ask for, could you give me a little more time?
Yeah, bargain for a little time.
Yeah, a little time.
Yep.
But no, I wouldn't push the button.
Yeah.
No, yeah.
Me neither.
Because then I'd never get anything done.
Yeah.
What's the point?
Yep.
What's the point?
Right.
It's the yin and the yang.
Yep.
Absolutely. So for people who are listening who have, something traumatic happen to them that changes what was normal.
Yeah.
Because I think so many people want it to be like it used to be.
Yeah.
And I want to be,
Yeah.
quote, normal. I
Yeah.
want to be like those people.
Yep.
Yeah.
Well, and it's a funny thing as we grow up too. You spend so much time as a young age trying to be like everybody else, and
Right.
at some point that you shift. You want to be like just
Like you.
nobody else,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
at least just like you.
Yeah.
But I have to say, to be really clear, Oprah, I mean, it took me a few years to feel what we're saying right now. I could say these words pretty quickly. I knew the ideas, but to feel it in my bones and to stop comparing myself to the old self, the old
Yeah.
body, that took honestly a few years before I stopped doing that.
What did it take? Actually practicing what you were saying, putting into practice on a daily basis.
Yes.
What you intellectually understood.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was, like, early on, I had this ruthless sort of, it was just a trick, sort of, like, I was looking for silver linings wherever I could find them. And I'm not, like, one of my early silver linings was, I used to, like, when I'd walk in an ocean, I would be afraid I was going to step on a stingray or something.
Yeah.
So one of my early silver linings, just to pull myself forward, was, oh, well, now I don't have to worry about stepping on a stingray. And I was like, okay, yeah, great. I mean, it was silly. It
You
was
gotta
little.
start somewhere.
Gotta start somewhere.
Yeah.
And you start collecting these little silver linings, and that's how you start reframing the whole thing for yourself and making perspective with it. And studying art and learning how to see, and this human talent of how to look at something, not so much what you see, but how you see, that helped a ton. But yeah, I was putting into daily practice what we're talking about.
So studying art changed the way you saw
Yeah.
yourself, your condition,
Yep.
and the world.
Yeah.
After graduating with a degree in art history, BJ decided to pursue a medical degree, but not in the field many would expect, working with amputees. BJ found himself drawn to palliative care, which focuses on providing relief from chronic pain or for those near death.
So how do you get from art history to palliative care?
Okay, so studying art, that got me really focused on how to see, and the human condition, what it meant to be a human being. That became the subject matter for me, which was obviously therapeutic for me to think about. It helped me find a new confidence, feel like I had a place in this world. I didn't know what I was going to do for a living. I really had no idea, but I knew I wanted to be of service. I knew I wanted to have fun. I knew I wanted to feel like I had a creative existence. That's all I knew. So then with that was, well, medicine would be a great way. I mean, I could imagine if a doctor looking like me came into my room when I was sitting in the bed, boy, that would have been potent.
Yeah.
So that was the impulse. I didn't take any undergraduate pre-med
Doctor,
classes.
you've been through some things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it helps, right? I mean, the patients, and it's still to this day with my patients, I can get to trust much more quickly than some of my colleagues because one look, I was in the bed. And that helps a lot.
I think that's powerful. I've been in that bed.
Yeah. It helps. I don't have to prove anything that way.
So what has being around the dying taught you about living? You mentioned that moment where the body becomes the shell, and there is some kind of lingering in the air. Can you sense
Through his work at the Zen Hospice Project, B.J. Miller spent 6 years developing a patient care philosophy based on the spiritual values of compassion and service, and rooted in a belief that death is both sacred and unknowable. BJ has since expanded on those ideals by creating the Center for Dying and Living. It's a nonprofit website he created to be a vital source of information on quality of life, death, and everything in between.
So what has being around the dying taught you about living?
That's a great question, Oprah. One great lesson is dying people are still living. You know, it's like to realize it, see it as part of life, and to separate dying from being dead. Dying is these final moments of a life, and therefore a very potent, essential, really concentrated part of life, but it's part of life. So that's the first lesson is, oh right, dying is part of the deal, and I'm still living when I'm dying. That's a really important lesson. You start realizing that what makes anything precious except that it ends? So dying is what creates preciousness, what gives us the impulse to make meaning, because death proves life. I heard that statement once, and that makes sense to me. You know you're alive because you're gonna die someday. That's what proves you're alive. So, and another big thrust of this, Oprah, is what you learn is time is short. So the decisions you make are of consequence. Delaying things that you love or want or seek, not calling grandma, whatever it is, you have no promise of tomorrow. So live your life today. I mean, that's probably the singular best lesson about dying has to teach living, for me anyway. Yeah.
And so I love this ritual you all created at the Zen Hospice project, because anytime we've seen in a movie, which is how most people have seen people die, most people have not actually witnessed it themselves, it's cold and isolating and removed and everything but warm and comforting.
Yeah.
And you all have created a ritual of...
It's a flower petal ceremony. When someone dies, and the mortuary guys come to pick up the body and are taking the person's remains out of the house for the last time. Everyone gathers around and they just sprinkle it with flower petals. And some people may sing a song or recite a story that they heard from the person or some shared memory or just silence. But the most beautiful part is just the flower petal and seeing this body that is so clearly done. There's no life left in that body. You see it as a memory. It's this very mundane, amazing feeling. You see it as the shell that it ever was, but you honor it with flowers and you watch the body roll out the house, and that's the final image for the families. Contrast that with a typical hospital death in the ICU with tubes and machines and all this vulgarity and grotesqueness, which is essential to some degree and important. But it can often scar families unnecessarily. The final images can be so barbaric, and that sets you up for a very different grieving process than do flower petals.
So you mentioned that moment where the body becomes the shell. Can you sense when the person, the spirit, goes and there is some kind of lingering in the air? There's something that remains. Is that the person's spirit? Is it their soul? What is that?
Yeah. So, I've been around people who are just about to die, and bodies that have just died. And there is this lingering sense. It's true. There's a feeling that's a palpable, there's a lingering. And I don't know if that's in my mind or if that's in the air or if that's spirit. One thing that my injuries helped me with was to not need to know. I didn't need to have control of everything. I didn't need to know the answers anymore. I mean, I love not knowing. The answer is unimportant. It's just a sacred and gorgeous moment, and you can feel this.
It just is.
It just is. It just is. But I must say, too, I've been around folks who I'll be sitting there talking with their family, and we're having a conversation, and the person dies in the middle of the conversation, and it's seamless. It's almost gorgeously, like the word mundane. It's almost, they were here, then they're gone. And there's a moment where it's just so matter of fact, as you say, it just is. That's its sort of charm, it's its beauty. And then we start heaping meaning upon it. But in that moment, it's such a profound, stunning moment to see the body finally as a shell and devoid of that person. And in that moment of transition around the body, you're really in touch with the continuum of life, that life is proceeding. That individual is gone, but life goes on.
Coming up,
have you been with people who in their final moments are living that space of regret?
and later in this week's Super Soul short film, a young neurosurgeon grapples with the big questions as his life journey comes to an emotional end. Lessons from the New York Times best-selling book, When Breath Becomes Air.
What do you want us to know about what and how we should be thinking about designing our life and our death? Because you think that, or feel that they're inseparable, right?
I believe they are.
Yeah.
So some of this stuff is just Mother Nature at work.
Yeah.
But then there's this human element of it, how we design the healthcare system, how we design hospitals. Because a lot of the suffering you'll witness around serious illness or dying is unnecessary. It's the waiting 2 weeks to get a call from your doctor about a test result, when the test result was run within, a half an hour of, it's your car getting towed because the hospital didn't build enough parking spaces while you're in seeing your mother in her deathbed. And the healthcare system, most importantly, the 20th century was designed around diseases. Right. The idea was, life's wonderful. Then you get a disease and it sucks. Then if you can fix the disease, you can get your back self up to wonderful. That was kind of the thinking. But it turns out that illness, suffering, death are way more persistent than that. They're gonna come no matter what we do. So the healthcare system right now is in this reckoning. And so the system needs to switch from this disease-centric, to focus on the disease, to focusing on the person, to focusing on what it means to be a human being. Dying doesn't have to be the gnarly hotbed of suffering that I think a lot of us imagine. And some of our anxieties are unnecessary. And many of the people that I help care for, by the time that they actually die, they're really ready to go. They're done.
Yeah.
They're done. And that's okay. The hard part is very much for the family living on with it.
And so that's why fighting death should not always be the goal.
Not necessarily.
Yeah.
I won't talk people out of it if that's the way that a lot of people want to go down swinging. That's the phrase.
Yeah.
And I'll help them do that. It's not mine to mandate a certain way of dying.
Yeah.
But I think most of us crave a certain peace, and that peace is accessible. And I guess to answer your question most succinctly, in my money, the way we can prepare ourselves to die well is to live well and to live without regret. And that means checking yourself pretty much on a daily basis. Am I doing what I care about? Am I doing what I love? Have I told the people I care about that I love them, et cetera? These are fundamental things. And you check yourself on a daily basis, and by the end of a life, you won't have stockpiled all that many regrets. Regret's a bitch.
Regret's a bitch.
It's really hard. Loss is hard. You start putting regret and guilt and other things on top of that, doesn't need to be that hard.
Have you been with people who in their final moments are living that space of regret?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
Gotta be the saddest thing.
It is sad, but it's also important.
What do they regret? Because there's this phrase that nobody's gonna regret not spending more time in the office. Nobody's gonna regret,
It's true.
what your spreadsheet looked like.
It's kind of true.
What do they regret?
So I love these vicarious deathbed moments that I get to have.
Yes.
And there's some real truth to that. Like, why did I spend so much time with this job I hated? Why did I spend so much time married to that person I didn't really respect, or whatever. And there's some real truth to that. And it all invariably has to do with time and how you value your time. But what's also kind of true here is when you watch the power of just accompanying someone and bearing witness, some of that regret just gets to go away. Because regret, too, is also unavoidable. I wouldn't make all the exact same decisions now that I've made in my past.
Right.
The salve is being seen. The salve is being felt and heard and witnessed. That helps the regret fade so nicely. So I've seen those deathbed regrets, but I've also watched them just fall by the wayside pretty sweetly.
Being seen and heard by whomever in that moment?
By family, by friends, by volunteers, by nurses, by people in the moment who are daring to sit with someone who's in agony, who may smell funny, who's not themselves. The whole thing, dying isn't necessarily so pretty, which is extra potent when someone can sit with you and be with you in that state. It's an amazing thing to offer someone. That presence is an amazing thing to give, and it heals a lot of wounds quickly.
Wow. What do you say to someone who's lost their beloved? What are the words? How do you comfort? How can you be a comfort?
I think there are many opinions on that very question. For my money, there aren't really bona fide, guaranteed words. I've used the "I'm so sorry," and people will come back, "What are you sorry about?" I'm like, "Oh, well, I'm not really sorry." Anyway, the point is, language is deeply imperfect.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, one of the things that I think is so potent is in that moment of sharing grief with someone, is witnessing them. Sit in that hot stew with someone for a moment, like we're talking about that bearing witness.
Sit in that uncomfortable space.
Yeah.
That awkward space.
Yes. And
where you don't know what to say.
Where you don't know what to say. And you're sharing the chafe with that person. And that I've seen to be the real salve.
Yeah, a friend of mine said once when her mother passed and I was saying I didn't know what to say, she said, just being here.
Yeah.
You're being there, you're being present, you're not knowing what to say.
Yeah.
Because you're right, language is inadequate.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you believe happens when we die? Do you find people who are dying, if they have some kind of faith, is it easier for them? So what do you believe happens when we die? Do you have any theories on that? Thoughts?
So I do, yeah. One is, like I told you, I love mystery. I love not knowing. And that's such a creative space, so people can apply their own ideas to it. And I watch people do apply all sorts of ideas to it. But I do think, for me, like empirically, I don't need to know more than when you put my body in the ground, it's going to decompose, and the energy will transfer, and I will become that blade of grass. I will become the ground. I will become the tree. That's the kind of immortality that registers with me. And that's observable. That's just true.
Do you find people who are dying, if they have some kind of faith, is it easier for them?
It very often is a great salve to people in the end. Absolutely, without a doubt. But if there are cracks in their faith, those cracks can open and widen. And I've seen someone who would have considered themselves devout their whole lives and at the very end lose that faith, and it's extra hard. It's extra fierce.
Really?
It's extra terrifying. So I think the lesson is consonance with your faith, with your belief, holding true to your belief, whatever it is, rather than there being a absolute truth per se. It's your consonance with it. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely makes sense. What do you think is one of the big decisions or choices you made to fulfill your destiny?
I think it was two things. One was coming to see myself a little bit of remove from just me as not just my body. And that opened the idea that my life, my body was just raw material. Stuff for discernment, not so much judgment, just differences that I had to play with. And just seeing my life as raw material to play with, to make stuff with, that really has helped me a ton. And then seeing a sort of the generic nature of suffering. We have variations on themes. Mine is particularly dramatic, but it's not more or less than yours or anybody else. It's just interestingly different. But seeing variations on themes, seeing the theme rather than the variations as the key, therefore seeing what unites us, therefore seeing what we have in common, keeping my focus
And seeing
there.
that all people suffer on some level.
Yeah.
When do you think your life force is most fulfilled?
When I'm loving somebody and they're receiving it. You know what I mean? They need to receive it for me to really feel that. And I do think one of the cool things about love, I think we all talk about the desire to be loved. I think a lot of us who have animals in our life, we all talk about the unconditional love we receive from them.
Right.
Gorgeous, no doubt about it. But honestly, I think the bigger lesson is that we're all looking for a safe place to love. It's very safe loving my dog Maisie. She's not gonna bite me for loving her. It's harder to love human beings sometimes.
Correct.
And I think we all crave this safe zone to love, as much or more than being loved.
And you feel the presence of love when? Finish that sentence.
So in my mind, love, it's like an aquifer. It's ever present all the time. It's there for us if we want to. We just got to get our act in gear to feel it, and it's like let it come through us. You know, but it's everywhere. I would say it's omnipresent.
And the purpose of forgiveness is?
Forgiveness is my favorite muscle in the human body. Really, it really is. It's so potent. The act of forgiveness is really being, is the kindest thing we can do to ourselves and others. And it's the way to move on. It clears the path to delight in the time you have while you still have it. So I don't know if that answers your question of what the act of forgiveness is. But it is a loving thing to do. I know that much.
It was my joy to talk to you today.
It was my joy, Oprah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Coming up, his memoir recounting the spiritual journey of his final days inspired millions to live better, do better, and love better when breath becomes air is next. In this week's SuperSoul short film, the poignant reflection on love, death, devotion, and a life lived with purpose that captured the hearts of readers around the world. Paul Kalanithi spent most of his life striving toward the future. Passionate about both science and writing, he majored in English and biology at Stanford and went on to earn a master's degree in English literature. He then pursued a second master's in philosophy from Cambridge.
If you asked me when I was 17, what I'd be doing with my life, I would have said, I'd definitely be a writer. But found after I completed my undergraduate studies that medicine was in fact the perfect place for the kinds of things I was interested in and passionate about.
Paul met his wife Lucy during their first year at Yale Medical School. 4 years later, they married before moving west to begin their residencies at Stanford. But at age 36, as Paul was close to finishing nearly a decade of training as a neurosurgeon, he received a devastating diagnosis: stage 4 lung cancer. In that single moment, Paul says, every dream he had for his future disappeared.
You're always thinking about 5 years down the line, what are you going to be doing? And that number has no meaning for me anymore. I now spend just most of my time thinking about the present and what I plan to do each day, each hour, each minute. Clocks used to sort of rule everything are now kind of irrelevant to me. Having a terminal illness, kind of forces you to think about your life and what matters to you.
Forced to confront their new reality, Paul and Lucy realigned their relationship, focusing on what mattered most.
There were a couple things that were important to him. One was to return to work as a neurosurgeon and then to start writing. Those were sort of the two big professional dreams that he had. Then he had sort of a sentimental thing that he really wanted to do, which was to go back to the destination that we went to on our honeymoon. It was that same kind of feeling of a celebration or a commitment. We still had those same feelings even though he was dying. I think the thing that Paul really taught me and showed me is this really simple idea that life is not about avoiding suffering, it's about finding meaning.
Part of creating that meaning was to start a family.
The decision to have children after I was diagnosed was probably the biggest decision that Lucy and I had to make. But kind of the way we ended up thinking about it is that, even if you're dying, until the day you actually die, you're living. And for me, it was important to know that Lucy would have a family after I was gone.
I asked him this question, is it gonna make the fact of dying even more painful for you? And he said this really amazing thing. He said, wouldn't it be great if it did make it more painful?
Paul and Lucy welcomed their daughter, Katie, on July 4th, 2014.
Since Katie's birth, my time with her has had a very peculiar and free nature. I mean, it's all sort of feels to me like bonus time, in the sense that, in all probability, I won't live long enough for her to remember me. But at the same time, every day is a, exciting, rewarding, meaningful time to spend with her.
Looking into those eyes feels like a real connection to Paul. There was sort of this contrast between dying and growing or living, and it was sort of all happening at the same time. And I feel like one of the big challenges and privileges of my life is to help her understand that narrative of where she came from and who her dad was. And then she and I are together going forward.
Paul Kalanithi died on March 9th, 2015, at the age of 37. His spirit and his wisdom live on in his New York Times best-selling memoir, When Breath Becomes Air.
Paul, as many of us are, was interested in the question of what makes my life meaningful.
It's a careful balance. If you don't think about the bad case, that ending is going to be very rough on you and your family. But if you don't think about the good case, you're going to miss an opportunity to really make the most out of your life and time.
Thank you, Paul and Lucy, for this gift of your story. Supersoulers, I wish you a joyful and peaceful SuperSoul Sunday. See you next week.